Hi everyone and welcome to another comparison video here at Merriam Pianos on YouTube. Today we are comparing the Roland FP30X with Casio's PX-S3000. This is a comparison we have not done yet, but it occurred to us it probably makes a lot of sense. These instruments are virtually the same price. They are targeted at exactly the same market and customer out in the marketplace. And so we're going to compare their action. We're going to talk about the differences in the tone and the selection between the two, discuss the differences in functionality, and hopefully by the end it will be more clear to you which one might be a better fit. Thank you so much for tuning in. If it is the first time that you have been with us on YouTube here at Merriam Pianos, we would ask that you subscribe and hit the notification bell as well. We're always coming out with new videos and we love when our regular viewers are there to help support all of that new content. So without further ado, let's get started with the FP30X and the PX-S3000 right away. So what we have here are two instruments that really for about the same price, and depending on what market you're in, this is going to be anywhere from, I don't know, $700–800 up to maybe $900,000 wherever you are in the world. For either one of these instruments, and you've got two instruments that are both pretty recent and both give you gig-ready possibilities. There are other pianos that are in this price range for sure. We know that there's the Yamaha P125. We know there's the Kawai ES 110. Both of those instruments are older than either one of those two. And particularly with the ES 110, I think that instrument is due for a refresh. It's great the way it is, but one of the most frustrating parts about that instrument for me is the lack of real control surfaces, which unless you're going to stay within one sound or one or two sounds, to me makes it great for personal use, but on stage use kind of really limits what you're going to be able to do with that instrument other than just use it as a trigger or as I said, a single patch source. So with the PX-S3000 and the FP30X, you've got two pianos really made for the 2020s in terms of a lightweight instrument that could be used for personal use inside the home, but very much is going to be found when we're allowed to get out on stages again, on stages. People using these as either primary 88-note input devices or possibly secondary instruments. And so we're going to take a look at both of them. We're going to be talking about the sound first, which we normally do, and then we'll get into a comparison of action. That's probably one of the most important and distinct differences between these two pianos. And then finally we'll cover the features. So let's start with sound. Over on the FP30, they've upgraded this recently to their BMC chip. And we've done another review between the FP30 and FP30X. This is the FP30X. Where you can hear just how big a difference that chip has made. Either the chip or some sort of an upgrade to the speaker, combination of those two things. But the FP30X is bringing a lot to the table that when the side-by-sides, you can really hear a gap between it and the 30. The PX-S3000 is, even though it's packaged the same or very similar to the PX-S1000, is a very different beast. So if you're out there shopping for things in this price range and you've heard about the 1000, please do not assume that they are two shades of the same color. But besides the fact that they both have a similar case and a similar action, they couldn't be more different, to be honest. In fact, this has more in common with Casio's CDP-S350 than it does with the PX-S1000. its functionality is actually very, very similar. So we'll be talking about that as well. And on a sound standpoint, this has got an upgraded chip that the CDPS does not have. This is putting out 192 notes of polyphony and really quite a detailed tone. With the BMC chip, I didn't mention it, we've got 256 notes worth of polyphony. So both of these models bring to bear really the most up-to-date technology that both manufacturers have, and crammed it into a very affordable, very lightweight instrument. So let's go and listen first to the Roland FP30X. We're going to play through some of the most common sounds, talk about what I'm hearing, and we're also going to have a listen to the internal speakers. So we are taking line outs from both of these instruments, but we are also taking stereo microphone recordings of the speakers. And we're going to tell you exactly when you're hearing one versus the other. Because unlike the smallest members of the 88-note weighted community, these are starting to pay attention to the speakers. And it's kind of important, because if you're using this for personal use, you don't always want to be using headphones. You don't always want to have to stick this through stereo to get great onboard sound. And this is kind of the first point where onboard speakers really start to make a difference. And we do have a difference between these two as well. We've got 11 watts per side over here. We've got 16 watts per side over there. So we'll see how that renders out in the space and the air around our ears. So let's start by playing the FP30X, and we're going to start on the default piano tone. So there's quite a bit of warmth to the tone. One of the trademark aspects to Roland piano tone generally is it is a little, there's a bit of an absence in the space in the mid-range, kind of not the upper mid-range, but that right in the sort of the human voice area. So we're talking about sort of 300, 400, 500 hertz right in there. The kind of things that if you emphasize that range, it starts to sound a little like an LP. And the Roland tone, this actually even happens on their amplifier. So this is obviously more than just an accent. This is a bit of a decision that this is the sound they're going for, not just with pianos, but with other instruments as well. There's a very notable V to the sound, with that mid-range being a little suppressed. Now, in a stage setting, I actually really like that V because it nestles really nicely around a singer. If you're accompanying a singer, fits well into the mix of another band. When I'm playing just for private use, I usually go in and edit that so that I can sort of bring a little bit more warmth to the mid of the sound. So when I'm playing, like I've got an RD2000 at home as my personal kind of everyday board, and that one I've edited pretty heavily to give me some more of that mid-range tonality. In terms of the speakers, we've got 11 watts per side. And I don't know how much of this is a function of the case or the cabinet versus the speakers. I guess it's always a bit of a combination of everything with speakers and the speaker enclosure. You know, it's the space and the air within that space that's interacting with the magnet. There's a little bit of woofiness to the lower end. Not anything that's unpleasant. But it does give a pretty decent amount of depth in the bass. One of the things that we noticed about the 30 versus 30X is in the high end, the highs on the X are far more rounded. There's an edge that's missing now, which is, in my opinion, a good thing. So we've got this on its default piano tone as well. Now there are kind of three playing modes on the 3000. It's the same as what is on the 1000. And I think by default it comes on with the ambience or the reverb engine on, but you can shut everything off. So you've just got essentially the dry tone without any signal processing, post-signal processing to it at all, which is this. That's the dry sound. Then you get into, where did it go? Sound mode. So this is now with the reverb engine engaged. And then there's this third mode, which they probably have a name for it, and I should have looked it up, but I'm just going to call this stereo explosion mode, because it sort of takes this a stereo spreader effect, and it's almost like a three-dimensional effect. If I had to describe it, it's like you maintain the normal stereo field of the key, but then the reverberant tone actually is switched. So you're hearing the fundamental of your right hand still coming out of the right side, but then the reverberant effects of the notes on your right hand are coming at you from the left side, and it sort of creates this impression of being in a bit of a sound dome. There's moments where I think it sounds really cool, and then there's moments where it's actually quite disorienting. Okay, let's go back to normal default mode. I think I prefer that. This has 16 watts per side versus the 11 over on the Roland. It's a very different kind of bass response on the PX-S3000. Also quite beefy for its size. There's a warmth that I don't get on the Casio that I do get on the Roland, and again, I think that might be just a function of the fact the Roland has a larger case. I think there might just be more air inside there that's being resonated, kind of the resonating box effect that has, because you can see, of course, this is very compact. The 3000 uses an extremely compacted frame, which resulted in a different action design we're going to get at a little bit later. There's parts of the piano tone on here that I think I like better than on the Roland. There does seem to be a little more mid-range complexity that I get out of the Casio, but the high end of the sound I prefer on the Roland. I find that it just seems to be a higher resolution or a higher fidelity. A little cleaner. But this does feel a little more intimate. There's something a little more intimate about the Casio. Let's talk about dynamic range, because that's something that I've been paying more and more attention to with digitals generally, is how they respond in the lowest dynamic ranges, the highest dynamic ranges, and just, you know, how, yeah, what's the palette that it's giving us volume-wise? So the Roland has certainly improved itself from the previous generation in terms of just how many layers you have to play with in the lower volume ranges. Much better control. Casio, it's quite interesting. The tone is quite varied. You really do have many different colors at your disposal. And it's a very smooth curve. This is their air engine. I don't know why, I just suddenly started thinking about the AI Steven Spielberg movie from several years ago. It's a beautiful soundtrack. Lots of that kind of flowing piano arpeggios all over the place. So the tonal palette is there, but the dynamic range itself is quite compressed. So even when you're playing very, very quietly, the sound coming at you is a little more elevated than you would want. So it really is like a compressor type of effect. And in that way, I'd say this reminds me a lot of like what Yamaha tends to do. It's complete opposite to something like the Kawai, where Kawai, for better or worse, I mean, it's definitely has its detractors and its supporters. The dynamic range and the tonal range on the Kawais is really big, to the point where it's almost too soft when you're playing really too soft, because the speakers aren't activating. You don't have a full piano around you, so at times you sort of wish, like, okay, I get that that's authentic Kawai, but you could have, you know, given a bit more down there. So I've gone on quite a while about the acoustic piano and, you know, the comparison between the two. You know, those are my thoughts, really. You've got a very different bass response between the two. You've got a difference in how the high end of the note is rendered. You've got a difference between the tonal palette and the dynamic range on both of these pianos. I'm not sure that I necessarily have a clear preference between the two, other than to say I'm very used to the Roland sound, but there is an intimacy that I feel playing the Casio that I don't quite feel playing the Roland, which is interesting, you know. It could be the compressor effect where I'm feeling closer to those quiet details. Another thing it could be is the placement of the speakers. On the PX-S3000, the speakers are largely facing out to the back. Well, not largely, they are facing out to the back. And they've got some tone ports here, so you get a little bit of that coming forward. On the FP30X, they're facing entirely down, so it's more indirect. Once we move out of the piano sound, because there's a lot of people who aren't going to be using these exclusively with the piano tone, we get into a really big difference in approach. We have a fairly small number of tones on the FP30X, relatively speaking. A few dozen, 40, 50, something like that. On the PX-S3000, we have 700. And the sound components, or the, I think, not the processor itself, but it seems like the sample sets, the sound sets, are directly copied or are the same as what you get on the CDP-S350. So you have several different categories. You have piano, E-piano, organ, strings, pads, and then brass, single reed, woodwinds. You've got leads. You've got not even going to try. I can't do that authentically. And then into your general MIDI set as well. It's a pretty good nylon guitar. And then you have registration as well. So as you're finding all of these sounds that you really like, it's easy to build up, you know, like a set list or a block of tones that are easy to access if you're going to be doing this within a performance. So we have a relatively small number over here. But let's compare some of the classics. So here's Rhodes on the FP30X. So over here, we have, let's see, what's going to be similar. Something like this, probably. Not really. It's got a phaser. It's getting there. That's pretty close. There's a lot to choose from on here. let's listen to the organs. And we've got some organs over here. So as you can hear from both, virtually in every category, each has really high quality stuff to choose from. It's just on the Casio there is just way more. So if you're in a playing situation where the variety of tone is something that would be pretty critical. So instead of primarily using the instrument to lay down core Rhodes or acoustic piano stuff, which I could imagine in a gig setting that's probably what the FP30X would be used for, or triggering some VSTs. On the Casio, you're going to be in a position where you can maybe hunt down and find some far more track-specific, character-specific patches to match certain pop tunes that you're trying to cover, or really go for something that's going to be a little less layered, a little more exposed as a prominent part of a performance. We are going to move on to action now, because I feel like we could go on all day with sound. I can sometimes really get wrapped up in the differences of that, because I don't know, sound is just so personal, and it is what connects, for me anyway, it is ultimately what connects me to an instrument or not. So hope you've been able to get something out of that exploration and discussion about the sound between these two pianos. So we'll be right back in a moment with action. So the action on these two instruments are quite different. Do not assume that you are going to like one or the other simply based on your past experience with either Casio or Roland. The Roland does use the PHA-4, so if you have already played a PHA-4, then you can pretty much count on your past experience being the same with this one, because they haven't changed anything with the PHA-4. Still that good old action. It is a triple sensor. It has got escapement. And feels good, works well for kind of light and medium duty use. Roland makes the PHA-50, which is up from this one. They put it in some of their beefier boards, the stuff that's really designed for full-on studio use or gigging, like RD2000 has that. FP90 puts the PHA-50 in there. A lot of their LX uses the PHA-50 or their HP stuff. So it's a beefier action, and there are specific engineering things in that PHA-50 that make it just better suited for really intense use. But for not really intense use, PHA-4 feels good, looks good, is going to work really well. Over on the Casio, this is a smart scaled action. It is not a triple sensor. It does not have escapement on it, and it is an action that was created specifically for these really ultra compacted bodies. And when it first came out, there were a number of kind of forum talking points that were floating around that was focused on the difference between the black key weighting and the white key weighting, albeit there are some differences between the black key and the white key. But for me, the most a critical thing about this action is you just need to play it, because it's also inaccurate to say that this feels like a normal action. There is a bit of a different feel to it. And while I don't necessarily focus on the white versus the black key, the overall thing feels different enough that you wouldn't want to buy it sight unseen unless A, you didn't have prior experience with the digital piano. If that's the case, you're just going to get used to it. You'll be fine. You'll totally love it. But if you do have some prior experience with weighted digital pianos or an acoustic piano, it might be a good idea to try and get a hold of one give it a run before you make the plunge. And here's, the best way I can describe it, what I think you'll be feeling between this versus, say, the PHA-4. When you're playing it quietly, and fairly simply as well, it feels totally normal. In fact, there's parts of this that I think feel a little more secure actually than the PHA-4 over on the Roland. But the minute that you start to get into some heavier playing, it suddenly feels a little light, but at the same time a little bit heavy. And I think the reason that's happening is that the key bed, you get the impression that the key bed is not quite as deep. So it's like you don't have quite the same travel distance that you're expecting. So as you start to give it more, you have this simultaneous, a bit of a contradictory sense that it is at the same time too light as well as a little too heavy or a little bit sluggish, compared to what you get on the PHA-4. The longer I play this, the more I get used to it. Because I think, like any instrument or any tool, you do start to accommodate, your brain subconsciously starts to get used to it. Yeah, the longer key stick in the Roland certainly gives it a different sensation. It's a physical sensation. It's all of this stuff is very difficult to describe or put into words. Us piano players are terrible with just making up, random vocabulary to try and describe what we're feeling. Even with tone, it's like, oh, it's chocolatey. What does that even mean? But I'm guilty. I've used stuff like that, those kinds of terms. So, final verdict on this is, if you don't have any experience with an action, you aren't going to have any complaints with this whatsoever, because all of the basic stuff, does it feel solid? Yes. Is it super clicky? No. Is my impression that this is going to last, hundreds and hundreds into the thousands of hours range without a lot of physical failure? Yeah, I think you're going to get that kind of longevity. It's got a nice texture on it. And it seems well matched with the tone engine. So, all of those things, if you don't have any previous perspective coming into this, I don't think there's any reason to steer away from it. If you've got a lot of prior experience, as I said, that's where I think it would be very helpful for you to try and play one of these before placing the order, just so that you know for sure that you're going to like it and you're going to enjoy it, because there is a difference. Once you get up into that medium to higher level of force, The sensation is a little bit different because they have exchanged the length of the key stick for some weighting, and that works in several situations, but it does, it just changes the behavior a little bit. So that's all we're going to talk about with action. Let's move on to the final section where we're going to compare the features, which are as different as the action. Thank you so much for sticking with us so far. We'll be back in just a minute. Talk about apples and oranges when it comes to features. We have something that's actually a lot closer to like the FP30X in terms of the range of functionality on the PX-S3000, and in some cases even more. There's a few stage piano-y features like the 2 assignable knobs, which are remarkably easy to use and to set up on the PX-S3000. It's also got a mod wheel. That is, both of those things are missing from the FP30X. So the PX-S3000, I think, really is designed to be a standalone stage keyboard at a basic level with a huge range of tones, a huge range of effects and the ability to control them, as well as auto accompaniment. So I could see a lot of people in wedding bands using this. You know, there's no need to be lugging around $5,000 Korgs and Yamahas and Roland, even Roland RD2000s for some of those shows. Like, no, you don't want to break your back. You don't, all that other stuff is overkill. Maybe you're only going to need 30 or 40 different tones, a couple of rhythms to supplement a drummer. Maybe you're going to send a click, off through this, whatever it is. So it's a nice, versatile, low-cost machine for somebody who wants a weighted keyboard and fairly lightweight. The PXS even works with batteries. So talk about portable. Roland does not have that. You've got discrete line outs with the PXS3000, which is also great for live gigging. It does not have Bluetooth connectivity. So you can use this with Bluetooth audio, but you can't use it with Bluetooth MIDI. Not sure why they chose to do the one and not the other, but this is true. So if you're going to use this with the apps or anything external, it's got to be wired. But you can use a mobile device and cast to this and have the Bluetooth audio working. Over on the FP30, a totally different beast. I mentioned it a few other times through the video, but what we've got here is probably an instrument, unless you're going to be using it for personal use, or if you're in a professional setting, very good chance you're going to be going back and forth between an acoustic piano and probably an electric piano, maybe one other. You may be using this to trigger a VST, and this has Bluetooth MIDI as well as Bluetooth audio, so it's going to fit into a multi-instrument setup really quite well. Both are available with triple pedal systems. Both are available with fitted stands, which is also very handy, and both are available in multiple colors, which is fun. Actually, the Casio is one more. They have red, white, and black, and the Roland has white and black. The FP30 also has the ports, the discrete line out, which is really quite handy, almost a necessity now, and that was one of the major upgrades they made from the FP30 over to the FP30X, was those 1/4 inch line outs. One last thing I'm going to mention before we wrap up on these two instruments is the control surface, because they're super different. On the Roland, we have a series of buttons that you can use in combination with shortcut keys on the instrument. There's not really any display, so you do kind of have to remember in your head where you're at, because it's not going to remind you. There aren't a ton of tones to navigate, so that's really not a huge deal, but it is something to be aware of. No display, which is something that's less common now than it was a few years ago. Many instruments are now coming with some type of a small OLED display to let you know where you're at in your navigation of the instrument. On the PXS3000, we have this super slick user interface. It's quite similar in look, but not in function, to what they have on the PXS1000. From a functional standpoint, this is virtually the same as how you would run and operate their CDPS350. Except you've got this high gloss finish and there's no actual physical buttons. Some people are going to find that really cool. Other people might find that a bit annoying because if you're fishing around in the dark, you don't have that nice comfortable clunk to know that you've activated the button. You do have to be looking at the display to know that you have successfully switched the function or advanced through a menu. Once you get to know it, it is pretty easy to navigate, and the central display does do a great job of letting you know exactly what's going on. So it is very intuitive. You do see the fingerprints after a while. I guess you're going to just have to, swipe that up with a cloth every once in a while. But I don't find it to be particularly distracting. But it is something to be aware of. So with these two, it really is a battle of probably an overall slightly better pianistic experience on the Roland versus a ton of functionality and variety of sound and a lot of great ease of use with the display and with all of the button configurations you can have on the Casio. So thanks so much for watching the review of these two instruments. Really a battle of something that's giving core pianistic function and quality with the Roland versus a huge amount of variety of function and tones with the Casio. Both in a highly portable format, both very, very lightweight, and both, I think, emblematic of the industry trying to put more emphasis on the onboard speakers as well. They both sound, although not the same, great for lightweight, inexpensive instruments. Good enough that you could probably use this without any reinforcement in a small rehearsal, and certainly for personal use. There's lots of body and lots of character of the tone just out of the onboard speakers. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope that if you've enjoyed it, you will subscribe and be back for more videos in the future. Also, please hit the notification bell so that you will be informed every time we come out with a new video, which is quite often, usually 2 or 3 times a week. So we will see you back for more videos shortly. My name is Stu Harrison. This has been Merriam Pianos on YouTube. Have yourself a great day.